Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. If you need to use the closed captions or subtitles, please click on the CC button, which you can find at the bottom corner of your screen. This will turn on closed captions or subtitles for the speaker's words. You can also change the caption language by selecting Settings, Captions, Subtitles, and choosing the language that you want. Please be aware that this function is not available on the Teams app for mobile devices. So, on with the webinar. Next slide then, please. Okay, thanks. And lovely to see everybody here tonight. This evening, we'll be discussing emotional barriers to school attendance, often known as EBSA. What it is, how it develops, and how families and schools can work together to support children and young adults. You can add any questions in the chat during this presentation, and we will answer questions later in the webinar for you. I will now pass on to my colleague James. Next slide, please.
Hi, thank you, Louise, and good evening, everybody. It's really nice to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm Dr. James Woods. I work for Wiltshire Council as the Principal Educational Psychologist. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about, and if we could have the points come up, you can just pop them all up, that'd be great, thank you. We're going to talk about what do we mean by EBSA? What is it? What are some of the early signs that as parent carers you can look out for? What can you do about it? And this won't be exhaustive. And I do want to kind of emphasize, we've got a little bit of time together today, which is excellent, but it's a massive topic. And so I'll try and cover lots of things that are interesting and useful, but it doesn't mean it's everything. But we'll get some useful information out there. We're going to talk about EBSA and the role anxiety plays. We'll have a really brief think about social media and technology, and then just finally have a look at making a plan to try and move things on. So if we can pop onto the next slide. So what is EBSA? What are we talking about? We're talking about emotional barriers to school attendance. You might have seen it called other names. And recently, lots of people have been talking about emotional-based school avoidance using the same EBSA acronym. And we've used that in the council before. You might have seen it used, seen the term school avoidance or school refusal. But I think it's really important to note that the terminology has changed over time and it reflects a better understanding of what's going on and what EBSA is all about. If we talk about school refusal, if we talk about school avoidance, we're talking about something very much placed within a child making a choice to avoid school or refuse to go to school. Over time, we added sort of emotional based, so we kind of have a good understanding that there might be a bit more to it than that. And actually, the Department for Education have started talking about barriers to school attendance. And it's really important to think like that. We'll come back to this idea across the webinar about thinking about what are the specific barriers. It might be something that a child is experiencing within themselves, but it might be other things as well. Something to do with the environment, something to do with school. So our name, EBSA, what it stands for, reflects a sort of broader understanding, really. Let's pop on to the next slide. We could move on the next slide. That would be great. So what do we mean by the barriers? Well, they're things which might represent any kind of issues that might prevent our young people from attending school. And the barriers to attendance, so they come up again, they're complex and there might be lots of reasons, lots of different barriers. They can include things like feeling overwhelmed by school, overwhelmed by the work they're given, overwhelmed by the social situation, possibly overwhelmed by sensory needs. It might be having needs that aren't being met, whether it's SEND or learning needs. It might be that our young people find it hard to cope with changes, things like transitioning to a new school or moving year group or having a new teacher. Or young people might experience challenges linked to neurodiversity. Or there might be family circumstances that make things particularly challenging at a certain time, such as parents who are unwell or tricky financial situations. And often these kind of issues can interact and they can be cumulative. And so they stack on top of each other and they can build up and make it feel like school is an unsafe or uncomfortable place. And it can affect a child's confidence and their sense of belonging and their sense of needing to be there. Let's pop on to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about anxiety, and we'll come back to anxiety across the webinar at different points. Lots of young people who struggle to attend school tell us that they experience anxiety related to school, and this is really common. But anxiety isn't necessarily always the main reason behind non-attendance. Some young people tell us that they made a conscious decision to stop attending because they're struggling in other ways. It might be that they're experiencing bullying frequently when they're in school, or that they're feeling embarrassed in class because they don't know the answers, or they feel they're not having their needs met. And these young people talk to us about the fact that actually it's really difficult for them in school, so they stop attending, and actually their anxiety begins once they've stopped attending school, and it grows from there. Now, lots of young people who don't attend or have difficulties attending school struggle with anxiety, and it's really important that we help them with that. However, if we want things to work out and for the situation to improve, it's often really important to make sure that alongside any support for anxiety, we're also kind of looking at what other changes we can make to the environment, whether that's changes to how things happen in school, whether it's changes at home or in the wider environment. And we'll come back to the role of anxiety, and we'll keep kind of revisiting this, but it's worth putting it out there right now that although anxiety is so kind of linked to EBSA and non-attendance, it's not necessarily always a driving factor. Let's move on. Next slide, please. Another thing, we could talk about this all night, but I just wanted to pop it in here, is EBSA and neurodiversity. There's lots of research out there, and even the Department for Education and others have been looking into this for several years. And we know that there are much higher levels of non-attendance amongst our autistic and otherwise neurodiverse students and young people. And if we think about autistic young people and those with ADHD and other forms of neurodiversity, often they have differences in their ways of interacting with school and being in school, which can be really challenging, and that can increase anxiety. And a lot of our neurodiverse young people tell us that they get those feelings when they're in school because of a range of factors, and some of those might be differences in terms of how they interpret and understand emotions and how they feel they're able to regulate their emotions in school. It might be differences in sensory processing. And we know that schools can be quite full-on environments in a sensory sense. It might be that our young people who are neurodiverse have differences in their executive skills, things like how they're able to be flexible with their thinking and how they can shift from one teacher's style to another teacher's style, or one subject to another subject, that kind of thing. Or it could be differences around social interactions. And lots of our neurodiverse young people find social interactions really challenging. And we know that school is a place where there's a cut and thrust of social interactions between young people, and it can be really hard to keep up with that. So I just wanted to pop it in there that amongst the other things we talk about, it's worth bearing in mind that our neurodiverse young people are at perhaps a slightly increased risk of struggling with attendance, and we need to be mindful of that. Let's come to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the early signs and things to look out for. There aren't any definitive markers for EBSA. We can't go and get a blood test and say, right, this child is going to have EBSA. But there are things that we can look out for. It's not an exhaustive list. There's all sorts of other things. But just being mindful of this kind of thing might be helpful. So, for example, if your child is regularly complaining about something like tummy aches or headaches or feeling sick, feeling nauseous, and that sometimes that sort of thing might come about with no sort of clear reason. You might kind of think, well, they haven't eaten anything dodgy, there aren't any tummy bugs around, but they always seem to have a tummy ache, before school, something like that. Bear that in mind. Having poor sleep, especially on school nights, or being more upset or emotional than usual, and that might be different for different people. Some people, when they're more upset, might go quieter and within themselves and have a sort of low mood and be a bit flat. Others might be quicker to anger, more dysregulated, or they might be more distressed and you might have crying more often. But if you look out for those changes in your young person's sort of emotional presentation and how they are, if they start sharing fears or worries with you, that might be about school, but it might not be about school. It could be other things. It could be that they start being really worried about something specific. It could be about food and not wanting to eat certain foods because worrying what they'll do, or might be worrying about not being clean or washing their hands a lot. It could be something else, but often when people have a specific worry, it might be an outlet for a broader issue lying underneath. And so it's worth unpicking with your young people if they have certain worries and fears that seem to have developed. You might want to have a talk to them about their wider life, how things are going. Signs of anxiety, such as sweating before school, butterflies in the stomach, feeling sick or nauseous or breathless. If when you're taking them to school or they're walking to school or getting ready, or when you're talking about school in the evening, if you're seeing that kind of thing, it might be a bit of a sign that things aren't great at school. And regularly talking about disliking school. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? But actually, lots of young people talk about disliking school. I've got 3 kids, and I'm not sure they kind of rave about how much they love school, and they'll often say they really don't like it. But you'll know as a parent when there's a difference between it being quite kind of targeted and them talking about perhaps specific lessons or specific teachers or something particular about school that they're really not getting on with. And it's sometimes worth keeping a note of that. It might not be anything major to start with, but be wary of it and take it seriously if it keeps going on. And it's something to feed back to school. We'll talk about that. And things about sharing worries with friends. Friends are such an integral part of school and those social interactions. And if your young person's finding that hard and is worried about it, that can be a really that can be a real barrier when we talk about barriers to attendance. So it's worth looking out for these kind of things and stuff where as a parent you think something about your young person has changed. There's something which kind of perhaps isn't right, something that's different, and having a conversation about that. If you pop onto the next slide. So in terms of things you can do, again, this isn't exhaustive, but there's some thoughts. And a key one, and this is easier said than done if you've got teenagers. I appreciate that's not always straightforward, but giving your child opportunities to talk to you. And so if you're noticing some of those things above, or if you're feeling things aren't right, then giving your child that opportunity to have a chat with you and really key bit is just let them know that you understand. Let them know that you're there for them to listen. Listening is so important. And it can be difficult as a parent, actually. It can be hard not to put your own stamp on the conversation or jump in and say that everything's okay. But actually, to take the time to hear and to reflect back that actually that sounds like it's really hard for you. It must be really difficult going through this for you at the moment. Well, it sounds like it's really not very nice. That's really difficult. That validates it for your young person and it makes them feel heard, because we might hear back from other people, from their friends, from school, that they seem happy and things, and it can be tempting to say, well, I think you always seem happy, but actually what they're actually experiencing and what they're telling you, well, that's what they experience. It doesn't make it any less true, and so we need to validate that and let them know that we've heard it. It'd be important to gently remind them that it is really important to go to school. It's key. You know, it's always going to be important. But if you can reassure them that you're on their side, that you'll try and help them and make school better for them, it might not be a quick win, it might be a process, but let them know that you're there to help, that you're there to listen and that you'll hear what they have to say and that they can tell you things that are difficult and that you'll try and support them with that. And when you're talking to your young person, it's really good to be a detective and look for patterns. Does your child always feel sick on a certain day of the week? Is it when they've got a specific lesson? Is it when there's a certain cover teacher who's been in? Are they telling you about certain peers and they're in lessons with those peers? Do they always mention the same teacher? That sort of thing. It's really good to get some details if you can and to build up a really clear picture of what it is going on. And that's not that easy, because when you're worried about something, it's not always easy to put your finger on what you're worried about. And for a young person, it doesn't always seem possible or feel possible to say, actually, the problem is this. But if we can talk and if we can gently nudge them and help them explore things, we might get to a point where we find out some of these details. And if you pop onto the next slide, let's go on to the next one. It can be quite tricky talking to our young people, but we know that a lot of young people are more comfortable. In fact, lots of people, full stop, it's not just young people. Lots of people more comfortable talking if they're also doing something. And so we can kind of get involved in an activity together, or if you're sat so you're not facing each other. It can be quite confronting if you're looking at somebody and expected to look them in the eye, or even just facing someone, having a serious conversation. So things like going for a walk together, walk the dog, or just go out and potter around the garden, potter around down to the park, or go on a car journey, Or something like playing a game, doing some drawing. If your child's into cooking, doing some of that together, or baking, or yeah, it can be anything, doing a bit of housework together, or anything, sit on the Xbox together. But if you can share a time with your young person where you're doing something, that can be a nice time to have these conversations. It's a little bit less pressured. It might help them to open up a bit. We know some children really like to share everything that's going on just before bed as well. Some young people don't at all, but others will, you'll be desperate for them to go to sleep. You have a bit of downtime, but then they suddenly open up, everything comes out, and that's a good time to leap on. If you've got any worries about your child, make the most of that. Next slide, please. So there's just some bits in here which they're taken from some EBSA guidance. We have some guidance documentation for schools and for parents and from young people, and these come out of that. And it's just some prompts that can help in those kind of tricky conversations. So if your young person's struggling to kind of either think what to say or doesn't want to talk, you can ask them some of these bits, or perhaps leave some bits with them as little prompts that they can kind of think about and get back to you, or message them. So things like, think about the 3 most difficult things about going to school, or the 3 best things about going to school, or even just the 1 best thing or the 1 most difficult thing. What are 3 things you're worried about? When do you feel most relaxed and happy? Are there times when your worry goes away? Are there times when you feel okay? They're really good to kind of give them something to sort of target their thoughts on, something to help sort of structure those conversations. If they don't like talking, some young people prefer things like drawing. Could you draw a picture that shows how you're feeling about school? Or a picture to show your worries? Draw me a picture to show what school would be like if it was really good, how it would be if it was how you wanted it. Or can you draw me a picture that shows what you're worried about in school? So these won't work for all young people, but they can be a really nice way in if you're struggling with that conversation. Some young people love to talk and open up, others find it a bit more difficult. So they could be helpful. Let's pop on to the next slide. One thing I just wanted to throw in there, and this is part of kind of when we talk to our young people, is reframing that conversation. So coming at it from another angle. And once a young person starts struggling to go to school and starts not attending, it can be really tempting to say, okay, how are we going to get you back into school? And they'll hear from school when they're in. Some people in school might work with them, and they'll be saying, how are we going to get you back into school? And it kind of becomes a thing. It builds it up and it puts pressure on. But actually, sometimes what our young people want to hear is, what can we do to make your life better? We know that the vast majority, almost all young people, they want to be in school, they want to do well. But sometimes there are these barriers that prevent that. And that might be in school, might be outside of school, it might be both. But if we can approach them and think, actually, yeah, things aren't quite working out for you right now, but what can we do to improve that? How can your life be better? That sometimes opens up a conversation a little bit more, and it might make our young people feel that they're really being valued as a whole person. It's not all about school. It's not all about that side of things. So that could be a nice way in. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So what else can you do if you've had those conversations? And don't worry if you haven't been able to do that. It's really good if we can get to the point of talking with our young person. But if you haven't, then let's crack on with this bit anyway. Let's talk to your child's school and share the concerns you have. And I know that can be easier said than done, but let's focus it. So let's talk to an adult in school who knows your child really well, if you can. That might be their class teacher, it might be their form tutor, could be the school's pastoral lead or Senko. But if we can find somebody who knows that child well, your child, it would be really good. And be as detailed as you can while you're talking. The more information you can give, the easier it will be for school to help. So all those bits about being a detective, putting that picture together, putting the puzzle together, is it certain days? Is it certain friendships? Is it certain teachers? That kind of thing. If you can start sharing that, if you can give those insights, it's going to be much easier for school to help. And I would say, I think it's really important to flag up at this point, be patient. And I know that's really difficult. And when you've got a child who's not in a good place, it's all consuming. It's such a difficult time. But schools are large and they're dynamic organisations, and sometimes it can take just a bit of time to align the wheels and get get the cogs in the right place. They will do their best for your child, but it might take some time for the support to come through. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And I think another part of that, sort of building on that really, is that it's always really important to recognise that non-attendance and being out of school and EBSA is complex and it's multifaceted. That means there's lots of elements to it. It doesn't always relate to a single factor. And it might be that there are several barriers that your young person's experiencing. And as a parent, we might need to be open to things needing to change at home. There may well be lots of things that need to change at school, but it might be also at home, and we might be needing to be ready to sort of face that and to think creatively about what we can do. When you're talking to school, it's really good to be ready to work with them and any other professionals, and actually having that positive relationship and being open and transparent and having that expectation of other people working with you that they're also open and transparent, but keeping things factual, keeping things calm is always really helpful. And putting aside your preconceptions. And that's true of everyone who comes around the table. When a young person's not attending, it is complex, and actually sometimes they'll throw things in the mix if we talk to young people that none of us would have thought of, and they'll chuck in something which will make everybody think, wow, hang on a sec, I hadn't realised that at all. And then we can start to build up a plan based on that because they've told us what's happening. And so it's always good to come there and being really open. So let's bounce on to the next slide. I wanted to put this in. I think it's a really important thing to always flag up, and it's the last one on this sort of bit about talking to school, I think. And I think it's always really important that everybody around the table, and we sort of almost need an agreement at the start of having these conversations, and to sort of share amongst yourselves as adults. So you as a parent carer, you're in a unique position. The school who work with your child are in a unique position, and seeing them in a different circumstance. And any professionals who are involved might bring something else. And it's about that everybody around the table understanding that young people can look and present and be quite different at school and at home and anywhere else really. And actually that's obviously it's not true of just young people, is it? It's true of everybody. I'd be lying if I said I'm acting in the same way that I act in every situation right now. We all do things differently depending on where we are and who we're with. And sometimes we also talk to people and tell people different kind of stories about what we've done depending on who we're talking to. And so there are lots of sides to that are important. For example, just because your child is settled in school and seems to cope really well doesn't necessarily mean that they're okay with it. And some of you will be familiar with that, and people talk a lot about masking these days, and that's a genuine thing. You know, young people mask in school when they can't cope, and they might look all right, and for the teachers who work with them, they seem okay. But actually, once you get home, you get the other side of it and hear about actually what they've experienced. And masking isn't just a thing that children who struggle do. We all do that. We all come into work on a difficult day and put on our mask. It's a human strategy. It's a survival strategy. But it can be really difficult for a school when you're managing lots of people, got lots of content to get through. It can be really challenging to stop and recognise that. Lots of schools are really good at rolling with that information, but it sometimes needs a careful conversation about it. But the flip side of that is sort of just as true as well. And we know lots of young people who'll come out of school and they'll talk about what a terrible day they've had and how difficult it is. But actually, it doesn't mean that's the whole picture. And I've worked with young people who will go home and have a really good moan to their parents, and it's like a sort of release valve. And actually, when they're in school, they've had a really good time of a lot of it. And sometimes they might pick up on a specific interaction or one thing that happened of a slight part of the day. And that can be the thing that they like to bring home and talk about. Now, either of those examples, the example of a young person who's settled and seeming to cope, but perhaps isn't, or the young person who's telling you they've had a terrible day, but actually had quite a good day, that's quite black and white. And the reality is often sat somewhere in the middle. But what we need to do and bring to the table, and what school need to bring to the table, is that openness and transparency to explore things and think, actually, if they were looking okay in school, that doesn't necessarily mean they were. Or actually, if they've said it's been an awful, there might be other bits which we can look at where it worked well, and we can build on those things. And so it's just a kind of bit about, I guess the takeaway for me is always that there isn't a truth. There isn't one truth. And I worked with a parent once who was talking about their child who had difficulties, and they used a lovely phrase about being, neither of these are more true than the other. They're both truths, and I think it resonated with me. I think it chimed right, because there is more than one kind of version normally, and that doesn't mean either are wrong. So we just need to be patient, work with people who are having a different experience of what's happened for our young people. Let's move on. Next slide, please. I do want to take time just at the moment to acknowledge that all the above said, we've talked about some things you can do and talking to your young person and things, but it's a really, really tough place. And we know how hard it can be as a parent, as a carer, when your young person is struggling to attend and when they're finding it difficult, and the emotional burden that places not only on them, but on you as a family. And we talk to and work with so many parent carers who tell us all about the strain it places on you as parents and the feelings that go alongside that, and whether it's the general upset around your child being upset, or the anxiety you have about having to call the school and say that they're not being in, or guilt associated with feeling that you should be able to get your child in, and that the judgment that you might feel from people. But what I wanted to share here is that we know that school non-attendance has increased dramatically in recent years. It used to be quite uncommon. It's not anymore. And it's really easy for our parent carers who are experiencing this to feel really isolated, and you're dealing with a mammoth problem on your own. But actually, there's a whole world of other people who are struggling with similar things out there, often really close on your doorstep. It is quite a common thing these days. And some of the organisations, whether it's Wiltshire Parent Care Council, the family hubs, and some others, they can do things. They can bring people together and give families a chance to talk to others in the same boat. Our family and community learning team in Wiltshire Council at the moment are running courses for parents who are to help understand the sort of early stages of non-attendance. And what families really get out of that is a chance to network with other people and to find other people who are in the same boat. So at the end of this, I've put some useful links, and I think they'll come into the chat as well. And some of those are really great kind of either resources or links for finding other people in the same boat, because it can be really helpful just to kind of feel you're not the only people in this. Let's pop on. Next one. Okay, I want to talk a little bit, I'm not going to spend ages on this, about anxiety. I said at the start how non-attendance isn't necessarily always caused by anxiety, but anxiety often goes hand in hand, whether it's there at the start or whether it builds up afterwards. And I want to talk you through two little models of anxiety, ways of understanding how it kind of develops and then stays around. So this is the anxiety cycle. And if we start at the top, we might have a young person who has anxious feelings about school. And if you're feeling worried about school, it might be you're worried about maths. You've got a maths test coming up and it's not your strongest subject. And you think, oh no, you start to have these negative thoughts. I'm not sure I'm going to do very well in my maths test. The teacher might pick on me. They might tell me off for not doing very well. And actually, something that might happen is a young person might choose to avoid that. That might be by saying that they feel ill that day and having that tummy ache or something like that. It might be going to the toilet for an extended time or leaving the lesson for some reason, and they might avoid that maths lesson. Now, the result of that is that in the immediate future, that anxiety will reduce. You've avoided that tricky situation that was worrying you. The risk there is that increases that avoidance of that situation. It might be that in future maths lessons, you also kind of feel a bit ill. you have a tummy ache or you have a extended toilet break, whatever it might be. And so you avoid that situation. Now, that doesn't really help your anxiety about that situation. It doesn't help your anxiety about maths at all. In fact, it kind of adds to that. And we know that that inner cycle, if you miss that maths lesson, for example, you then start to kind of miss more of the maths content. And so you're even less confident about maths. Before it might have been, well, I'm not sure I'll do well on that test. But then you get to a point of thinking, well, now I've missed loads of math lessons. I'm not going to be able to do any of the maths work. And so that kind of builds up those anxious feelings. It makes them even greater, and it gives you more negative thoughts because you think, actually, I'm really not going to be able to do it now. If you miss school a few times, then that dynamic of those social interactions we talked about. Don't know the last time you guys hung out with a bunch of teenagers, but it's 100 miles an hour, isn't it? And all that gossip happens. And actually, if you step outside of that for a little bit, there's a whole world sort of changes when people talk about new things and all that. And it can be really difficult to step back into that. And so you might feel worried then about coming back because you've missed all the things going on with your friends, and that's going to be awkward to rejoin them. And so that anxiety increases even further. The more of it you stepped out of, the more you're going to get anxious about it. And then at the same time, for example, being at home, if you've missed the whole school day, actually that can reinforce it. It can be quite pleasurable because, either just kind of sitting in your bed, or if you're at home on the Xbox or whatever it might be, that's kind of going to reinforce that not attending, and it will decrease any motivation you have to go back in. So you're less motivated, you're more anxious. And that's why in situations where a young person is feeling anxious about attending and starting to wobble and starting to attend less, it's really important we don't let that grow, and that we try and work really quickly, get in there early to kind of help them around whatever it is that's causing the problem. The maths lesson, keep using maths as an example, probably says something about my childhood, doesn't it? But whatever it might be, we try and put some help in for them. It doesn't need to be support with a big S. It doesn't need to be, huge things, but just something to help them get over that, what's worrying them, and before we get into this cycle where it gets worse and worse. If you pop onto the next slide, the other bit about anxiety I want to talk about is habituation, which kind of means getting used to it. And what we want to do if a young person is struggling with being anxious and perhaps not being in school, we need to help them with habituation to get back into it. Now, if you look at this graph, what it says, that yellow line, let's look at the yellow one, nice curvy one. It shows the height of it is how anxious somebody is, and the bottom line is kind of over time. And then you can think about that in terms of your young person. If you drop them off at the school gate, their anxiety shoots up to a really high level. And they've been out of school, they're worried about school, and they feel really anxious. And actually, as they step into the school gate, it gets to that peak at the top, and they're really worried. And there's a bit of time there where they're really worried about it. Now, hopefully somebody lovely at school will come and scoop them up and say, hey, let's have a quick chat. What are you worried? Let's get you sorted for your lesson. And slowly over time, that starts to come down again. And then we'll help you get into your lesson, and hey, you can sit with Tom and Dave, and they'll, and things start to ease off. And then over time, and it might be a little while, but over the course of that day, that anxiety comes down, and we've managed to sort of face that fear. And if we can stay in that space for long enough, then that anxiety should subside. It's a kind of fairly common psychological process around fear and anxiety. And what we find is if that works, if we manage to do that, the next time we come back, it'll be that green line below it. It'll still be really worrying to step through the school gate, but slightly less so. That peak will be slightly lower, slightly less anxiety, and a little bit easier to manage. Still really difficult, but a bit easier, and it'll come down a bit quicker. And if you do that and you manage that, then the next time it'll be that little bit easier again and come down quicker, and then it'll be easier. And the more you do it, the more you manage to stay in school or whatever it is and ride it out, the easier it'll get. Now, it won't necessarily work out that each of these lines is one day in school. It might mean doing this several times over the course of a week, 2 weeks, for it to kind of really embed and come down. But the general principle is that if we can face that fear and just get over that hurdle and then stay in it for just long enough for the anxiety to come down, that's going to be a really effective way to tackle that worry. If you pop onto the next one, I just wanted to say one more bit about this habituation cycle. And this is a really ugly graph, sorry. But if you look at the sort of green line, that's you're going up that first time you step into school. And there's two things to note. Firstly, the yellow bit. If you get into school, you manage to make it through the door, you meet with somebody who can kind of talk to you for a little bit, and you're about to go into your lesson, but then you sort of bail out and actually, no, it's too much, I can't do it. Actually, if you haven't managed to bring things down and get to that calm place, then it will go back in the same loop. Next time you come to it, you'll have that same peak of anxiety. You won't manage to reduce it at all. And it can be really important to just get to that point of feeling a little bit more comfortable. And then one of the other bit, this red line, is about we might get into school, we might start lowering that anxiety, or it might take, like I said, over a course of kind of several weeks, we might be getting to a point where being in school, that anxiety comes down. But if we have something unexpected, like a change as a supply teacher or somebody as a parent or as a school, they say, oh, you're doing really well, I think let's go for 3 hours today instead of 2 hours. Actually, that can cause that anxiety to come back up again. So we need to be really careful about, with our young people, not rushing them, bringing them with us at a kind of sensible speed, that kind of thing. One more thing about anxiety, I think. Let's do the next slide. I just wanted to put something in here about anxiety as a whole, anxiety, worry, nervousness. And that's this thing about, we live in an age where we all have a much better awareness of mental health than we would have done 10, 20 years ago. And that's largely in part to the internet, social media, Google, all that kind of stuff. And that's brought anxiety into our everyday language. It's something that everybody talks about now. It's not a term that's restricted to kind of health professionals or people talking about unwell people. It's really good that we've got better awareness. A lot of that, what we know now about mental health, means that we can avoid things that are bad for us and that cause us to have poor mental health. And we can be aware of the signs of poor mental health, and that can help us to act quicker. But there's always a flip side to these things, and we need to be really careful to not mix up anxiety and age-appropriate worry, because a lot of our young people who might have wobbles in school and can start to struggle and not want to attend are going through that period of teenage adolescence, and it's really age appropriate to be worried about things. It's part of the developmental journey young people go through, and their sort of heightened awareness of their own individuality, they're more aware of their potential differences from other people, and also their need to connect with other people of their age, and all sorts of things like that. And worry is a totally natural part of that growing up process. And what we need to make sure is that we reflect that back when we talk to our young people, because words are really powerful. If as adults we talk to our children and we talk to our young people about anxiety a lot, then they will take away from that they have anxiety, and that's sort of anxiety with a capital A, like a mental health problem. But actually sometimes it's just about being worried in a way that's difficult but is age appropriate. That doesn't mean we don't need to help them if they're worried, because that's our role as adults, is to help them through that. But we need to think carefully about what language we use around it. So I'm going to speed up through a couple more slides because I can see that we haven't got very long left. Let's pop on to the next slide. I just wanted to really quickly mention social media. So there's a really cool piece of research that's just come out. I will try and put the link in the chat later. It's asking young people about non-attendance. It's all about year 10 young people, this was, but it's quite, applies to others. They were talking about social media, and they were saying, actually, they want to be present on social media. Their friends ask them things. Their friends might be upset. Their friends question you. They connect with their friends after school in ways they can't always do in school. And they want to be there for their friends. They don't want to just ignore them if they're looking for help. And so they stay up late on their phones. They also watch influencers who are rich and famous, who didn't necessarily do well in school. That's not necessarily very helpful, but they see that. Other young people are already doing their own online businesses. There's a lot of young people who are doing that. And that can undermine the need to go to school. And people who online game with friends because they get together with their friends and they have a positive social side. If we flick onto the next one, the impact of all that is that our young people are genuinely really tired and can struggle to go to school, and they tell us that. For you as parent, something really important is to talk to your child about the use of social media and technology. There's loads of good things about social media and technology, and connecting with friends in a relaxed way can be really positive. That's great, and we should acknowledge that. But also, it would be good to help your child to talk about some of the challenges and demands that technology brings. And if they can bring that up, if you can invite them to think about it, that's really helpful, and help your young person to consider what might be sensible sensible boundaries around tech use. If you're always too tired in the morning, let's think about, do we need to kind of perhaps switch off a little bit earlier? And what can you do as a parent to help them stick to that? It might not be turning off the internet, it might be rewarding them if they've managed to kind of turn off their phone 5 days in a row or something. What do they think would be helpful? So, last couple of slides, I'll go through these real quick because I can see Louise is poised and ready. So when we're making a plan, the best way to make plans for increasing attendance are to be child-centered. Let's get that young person's views. They must be central to deciding what will happen and what the steps will be. If they don't think it's realistic and doable, then it's not going to work. Let's collaborate. Everybody's got to work together. School, home, the young people, any services who are involved. If we're not working together, it's probably not going to work. It's got to be realistic, and we've got to not rush our young people. We saw that anxiety. If we rush them, we're not going to have time to kind of let that really come down. And lastly, let's think holistically and be about engaging with life outside of school as well as in school. If they're not attending, what can you do to help them engage positively? Things like having dinner with you as a family, going to the park, to the local shop. And very last slide, and we'll pop some links for you to look at in the chat. So last one, if we can move on. So we really want our young people to feel comfortable attending their school, but if they're not able to do that at that moment and you're trying to build that up and it's not working, then focusing on meaningful engagement. Talk to school about that, talk to any professionals you're working with, or just think in these terms. Can they come down for a meal every night? Or even once a week? Can they help you with chores around the house? Can you put some structured time in to help that? Can you get up at the same time every day? Can you get dressed at the same time? Can you go to any clubs you've got? That sort of thing. And do any online learning. So it might be we need steps around engagement, and once they're starting to do things regularly like this, we can think about engaging with more learning and then perhaps school. Now there's a slide which has got some helpful links for you, some really good good people for you guys to link in with. I think we're going to pop those in the chat. But I think we've got some time now for questions and answers. I'll pass back to Louise.
Thank you, James. Thank you. That was a really full presentation, and hopefully everybody that's been listening today, they'll have learned a lot and give them lots of things to think about and strategies to take back and work with their young people. So thank you for those that are attending. We've had a good number of questions sent in advance, so we're going to sort of go through those now. If you haven't, but you would like to post some questions in the chat, and I can see that one's just popped up now, please try and keep that as brief as we can, just so we can kind of process it, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. But please be assured that if we don't get through them all, because we've only got a reasonably short time now, we will spend time after this webinar constructing answers, and then the answers to those will be posted on the local offer pages, along with this webinar recording, for people to look at in advance. Sorry, after this. So I'm going to be, I should ask you some questions, James, but we have got a number of other people who also might want to chip in. And then we'll go through those as quickly as we possibly can. So, James, first question that we were asked was, how can we develop strong, positive relationships between parents and school to support attendance?
Thanks, Louise. It can be so difficult, can't it? Because non-attendance can lead to those tensions between school and home, and for both sides to start blaming each other. But that good relationship is really important. And for that, for us as parent carers, it means trying to keep calm in conversations, sharing your information in a really transparent and open way, helping school to do that, and to ask them if they can kind of perhaps share things with you beforehand so you're prepared, that sort of thing. But you could also ask for some support. It might be that you want to bring a friend or family member to meetings who can perhaps speak for you if you're starting to find it difficult, or if you approach organisations like the Wiltshire Parent Care Council, who might be able to signpost for you to find an advocate to come with you. Or you might consider opening something like asking school to open an early support assessment, an ESA, which would open up some further support, a service to help you and bring a wider group of professionals into meetings. That sort of thing, I think, would be helpful.
Thank you, James. I mean, what you're describing is that really collaborative plan, aren't you, between school and home and parents, and then that bringing in others. Really great. Thank you. And we've seen lots of success with that. Okay. Second question then. If a child is attending school, but in a limited way, for example, 1 hour a day, separate from their class, those kind of scenarios that we see, what formal paperwork and processes should be carried out to acknowledge this is happening from a sort of, I think the parent there here was thinking about from both an educational perspective, but also an attendance perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. And I know, speaking to educational welfare, there's actually no statutory formal paperwork for limited attendance, but we do have, or schools can put in place, a reduced educational provision, or they're sometimes referred to as a REP. That has to be with consent of parents or carers, and a reduced education provision can only be in place really for a limited period of time. It should have a clear plan that talks about how you're going to work towards sort of full-time education and what that might look like. And the council has got some guidance for schools around that, and it has things like templates for the reduced education plans and parent consent forms, which they should give to you if they're thinking about that, along with things like risk assessments as well. So we can really look at any kind of situations where we're doing the best thing for the child. Definitely schools should give a written plan with what they're expecting and what the agreed educational provision will be, and things like, will they give you work to do at home, that sort of thing. If there are medical needs, that might be a bit different, and a full-time medical education plan might be implemented, which has the same kind of effect really, but I guess in practice it might look slightly different.
Thank you, James. That was a really full answer. Thank you. The next question, I'm sure, will resonate with many people on this call. So the question was, what is the best thing I can do to support my child? They've experienced failed transitions, reduced timetables, and still no closer to a resolution. Please help. And that was from a desperate parent of a year 11 young person, that they are awaiting an ASD and ADHD assessment and likely to have PTSD, as discussed with Cam. So obviously there's some complexity there, James, and lots of strategies being tried. And I know this is a something we see often. So any sort of things that you could suggest there, please?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. That sounds so difficult, doesn't it? That's really hard for you as a parent, and seeing that playing out and things sort of unraveling and not getting any better. I'd say first and foremost, your child's well-being is what you need to think about. And are they okay at home? Have they got somebody to talk to and share their worries with? Can you be a listening ear? Are there other people who could do that as well? And if you're able to ask them, or if somebody who's involved, whether it's CAMS, whether there's a link, somebody that they got on well with at school, an adult, somebody you can talk to them about actually, what sort of things might make your life a little bit better. It's not working going to school at the moment. That these plans aren't working. So how can we scale back those steps to be something you can achieve? And are there little bits that we can work on? Sometimes when we have plans around coming back into school, we perhaps, I don't know if expect too much is right. We've got to have high expectations, but we might make too big steps. And so we might want to reduce those down to just small things. And that might be about what we just talked about engagement, about other ways that our young people can get re-engaged in life. And that life right now might not be school, but it might be doing things at home that just follow a bit of a structure or a pattern, getting up at a certain time of day, or having a meal together, like I said before, going to a shop or a park, or even every day I'll join my friend John on a Xbox collaborative game online or something at 6 o'clock. Once these things start to be happening, we can start to build up from there, but it's so important to make things achievable. And also, I would say alongside that, it sounds like in this situation, and I'm sure this will be the case for many of you, you've got other professionals involved. There'll be a school there, you guys know what's happening, and then you'll have somebody like CAMS, you might have other people involved. If you can get around the table, the people who are involved, and have that collaborative sharing of information, what you all think is going on, what you think the key things that might make a difference are, but working together as a sort of team for your child is going to be a really important part of that.
Thanks, James. And is this another one that you think an ESA might be something that would help because it would bring together that plan, or is it would
That
it
sounds
look at
really
it?
sensible, Louise. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
spoke over you. Yeah, I think that sounds really sensible. And that early support assessment, that plan there'll be a key person who holds that plan for you and makes sure the meetings happen and people attend those. And there could be some support for you in that. So yeah, sounds a really good idea.
Well, thank you, James. Okay. And another one. I honestly thank you so much. People have really engaged with this webinar and sent in lots of questions, which is great. What pathway is expected to be followed when the LA advise a parent the child has EBSA?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Louise, and thank you to who submitted that. I think it's really important to note that there isn't really a set pathway because EBSA is not it's not a diagnosis, it's not a condition, it's not kind of like we have children who have EBSA, therefore we do this. And part of that is because when we think of EBSA in terms of barriers to attendance, all our young people have a different set of barriers that they're working through that are making it difficult for them. And what we need to do is try and unpick that. So what we expect is for schools, professionals, people who are involved to look at the EBSA guidance that's available to them, that's been produced by the council. We expect them to work really closely with that young person to try and find out really what's going on for them and to get their voice. It's always really important that that young person gives their voice and is able to, or has the opportunity to share from their point of view what's happening. It's important that the school work with you as a family to talk about those barriers. And then if things really aren't working after a while, I would expect the school to seek further support, perhaps talk to the education and welfare team at the local authority or some other services if they're not seeing that progress. And we'd expect a concrete plan to be put together that you've contributed to, that school have contributed to, that takes account of learning from other professionals, and for that to kind of address those barriers for that young person.
Great, thank you, James. Okay, next question then. It is entirely possible that the access to school also continues, is it entirely possible that the access to school also continues to college attendance? What can colleges do to support students to engage positively after a negative school experience?
That's a great question. Again, thank you. And again, there's lots of ways of looking at this, but I will throw in there at the moment that we know lots of young people who struggle to attend secondary schools actually go on to thrive in college. Secondary schools, because of the nature of the beast, can present real barriers for some young people, but the move to college actually gives them a different experience. They can be more independent, have more choice over things, they have to wear a uniform. It's a bit more flexible in some ways. And sometimes for young people, that can just make all the difference. But also, there are young people who still need that bit of support. And so a couple of things. For example, if you can contact the college and ask them about doing extra transition meetings, when you know what college it is, have discussions well in advance about the sort of support they can offer and the sort of extended transition they can do. So that'll be really getting your young person familiar with what to expect from college. They'll get familiar with the site itself, they'll know what it's like, they'll know where they can get support if they need it. And at the same time, if you've had those conversations and encourage school to share lots of information, then the college will be prepared as well. And they'll know the sort of thing that your young person struggles with, and they'll be able to whether putting some support in place, like saying where the young person can go and talk to somebody when they're struggling, whether it's making some little adjustments to their college experience, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you, James. There's one, I'm going to ask this question actually, that's one that's just come in. How can a child recover from being bullied by their best friend that was going on for 18 months before being able to tell the parents? And oh my goodness, yeah, that's really tricky, isn't it? And I'm going to ask Teresa McElroy, who is on the call here. I wonder if, Teresa, you would be able to answer that. Thank you.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish there was an easy answer. That sounds just horrendous. Any of us who have friends and those things fall apart from times. How can we expect them to recover? Well, what we know without wanting to sound like we're being light about it, is that kids can be really resilient and they can move on from things and it can be positive, but generally not without help. So from a school perspective, there's plenty of support that schools are expected to put in around inclusion. Schools have to have an anti-bullying policy. They have to have practice in place that supports it. So a good place to start, however long ago the bullying was happening, whether it's current or even in the past, it's really worthwhile talking to the school about what that looks like, what support is there, and how can that be. Schools also have access to additional support, because sometimes in some cases when it's really entrenched, they want some different views and some different ideas, and that's a lead the behaviour support service, and every school has a teacher that's linked to the school along with educational psychology and other services, but they can get that external advice to think a bit differently and to look at different approaches that might make a difference. So our service doesn't work individually with children but works with schools. So it's always fine for a parent to say to a school, do you contact the behaviour support service for any new ideas if you're saying that you're out of ideas or what you're doing hasn't been successful, or you're struggling with what to do next? Then they can always get that advice, and we have stuff on our website, our Right Choice website, that schools can access. But I'm sure James would agree, equally a conversation with educational psychology about what they already do and where the opportunities for doing it maybe slightly differently. All I can say is that sounds just really tough, because we know that bullying can have long lasting effects. I just want to restate, not necessarily. We can do stuff that sometimes can make a difference with schools. I hope that helps in some way. So yeah, talk to the school in the first place, really.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. That's really helpful. We're really running out of time now, so there's one last one that actually I'm going to answer because because of my role. So the question is, my child doesn't want to do GCSEs and it's stopping them going in. Any advice around that? And we know that young people, do feel that stress. It's completely understandable. And for many young people, they feel exactly the same, as particularly as they get into those sort of GCSE years where suddenly their education, they start to feel that pressure, I guess. And it really is understandable that they're starting to struggle with school in that way. And you're not alone and feeling like this. And there are definitely ways that you can support them through it. Obviously, kind of one of the biggest themes I think through today's webinar has been about listening to your young person, gently talking to them, gently being able to explore with them what it is that might be worrying them, you know, in those kind of really gentle ways. And that can be really difficult as a parent, because I think, you know, we're really concerned and we want to help them, don't we? And that can come out in our own anxieties, but that's sort of trying to talk to them at their own pace and gently exploring what it is about GCSEs and the current situation, the future situation that is concerning them. You know, is that around, is it about anxiety? Is it about GCSEs or whatever is around that? Is it about the stress of the situation in terms of the pressure that they're feeling, either from an external pressure or their own internal pressure? You know, young people can really start to feel the magnitude of, you know, of moving away from what's been, you know, something they have at school, which they haven't had to think about. You know, it's just what they do for all of their life, and suddenly the big world's opening up to them. So that gentle exploration and going at their own pace around that. Trying to be able to understand a bit of depth around that feeling. Is it about them feeling overwhelmed by the stress, the anxiety, the pressure, the you know, enormity of GCSEs? Is it about that they feel academically behind around that? You know, sometimes young people can be really good at masking and feeling like showing that they're on top of things, but actually they're feeling like they're not doing as well, and that, you know, they feel that's that sense of achievement. And sometimes actually it's not that at all. A lot of young people can start to see what's the relevance of GCSEs. You know, they want to be a tree surgeon, or, you know, in the army, or whatever it is they want to do. And actually they can't see that necessarily the GCSEs and the subjects they're studying are relevant to where they see their future path. So kind of getting that really holistic understanding of that. And as I say, let them know that you're listening. And then start to think about, there is life after this. You know, start being, as a parent, trying to explore the options that they have beyond the GCSEs. James talked about college, post-16 options. There are many, many options out there that aren't the traditional A levels, or you know, there's apprenticeships, there's all sorts of different things. So giving them that that sense of beyond, and what do they want to do for the future, and then so that they know that kind of there is life outside that. Obviously involves school and other support services in the way that we've talked about all the other scenarios. Talk to your school, let them know. They will be able to start to plan with you, and if necessary involve other services, and of course speak to their form tutor, the SENCO, and really reassure them about their future. We will, of course, add to that as a larger answer as we publish something. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. That was really useful. So everyone, we have reached 7 o'clock. In fact, we've gone 2 minutes over, so massive apologies. We've had lots of questions in the chat and in advance, so it shows what an important topic this is. We really understand that. Hopefully you've seen, you've gained lots from this, and you know, as I said, we will be publishing this webinar on the local offer pages, so please do visit there. Apologies for those of you that we know joined a bit later, so may have missed the very beginning of this it's not a podcast, webinar. Please do, once it's published, you'll be able to see the whole thing again or catch up in what you've missed. And as I said at the beginning, we've had many questions that were in advance, but also from now we will publish to those alongside the webinar, so you'll be able to refer back to those, and hopefully they're really helpful. Thank you to everybody who's presented today, particularly James, who has done lots of talking tonight, and hopefully that's useful. Again, we look forward to working with you all as we move forward together and supporting all of your young people. Thank you and have a good evening.